Next item on President's agenda is to discuss the new overtime policy. At our last board meeting, we had voted to make some changes to our overtime policy and some different things to our personnel handbook. I think we're making great strides in working department by department in working out effective ways to cut down overtime in the department. We started with maintenance, and we'll be working with the other departments as well. Our maintenance supervisor is going to come up with some kind of communicative plan that will work on either staggering hours, or if overtime is created from plowing, mosquito spraying, rather than create overtime, what they'll do is they'll take additional time off either the next day, or if they're plowing early in the day, they'll leave early if everything's cleared up. But again, we're working on coming up with ways that we're going to reduce our overtime and save taxpayers money. And again, we'll be working with other departments as well to come up with strategies and ways that we can work with each department to work at reducing overtime. Next item on our agenda is discuss possible action, proposed amendments to the village administration guidelines. And I'm going to let our attorney, Mr. Mulcahy, discuss some of these things that pertains to this discussion.
Okay, the first one on the agenda deals with the retirement contribution under 5.1. You've got in front of you a proposal for new language on 5.1. In your current handbook, the Village of Silver Lake Administration Guidelines, it says 5.1 currently, employees who are hired to work over 600 hours are eligible to participate in the WRS program upon hiring. That's no longer accurate. The WRS rule is now it's after 1,200 hours, so we have an immediate need to get that corrected. The language that you have in front of you then seeks to do that, and it should be, I think this is a very simple concept, and I think what we want to do is we want to float with what the WRS system changes from time to time. So in other words, rather than put 1,200 hours in there, and also, by the way, WRS can change it at any time that they want, if you will, so why would we want to have to keep changing the policy handbook? So as a proposed revision to the retirement contribution 5.1, which should be in front of each of you, it should read very simply as follows. Employees who are hired to work such that they are eligible for participation in the Wisconsin Retirement System program shall be eligible for village contributions toward the actuarially required employer contribution rate as may be amended by the Wisconsin Retirement System from time to time. That gives you maximum flexibility. Our village clerk is very familiar with the WRS regulations, is well aware of this, and when I mentioned it to her, she was right on it and knew that it wasn't 600 hours and so forth. But your policy handbook needs to be brought up to speed quickly so you don't have any claims by somebody who says, but your policy handbook says X, Y, or Z. So I think this is, I'd call this housekeeping, and I think it gives you the maximum flexibility for moving forward. At this point, I would suggest that I would entertain a motion from one of the trustees to approve the change to 5.1 retirement contribution. All you have to say is so moved.
So moved. So moved.
And then a second. Somebody needs
Second.
Second.
Pat Dunn. Move the motion to accept 5.1. Sabrina Moran seconded.
Sabrina was second and Pat was.
Pat moved the motion to accept 5.1.
Any discussion?
Is there any discussion to the changes to 5.1? Like Mr. Mulcahy said, it's... Clerk will call the roll.
Decker? Dad?
Aye.
Dunn,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Marianne,
Aye.
Welcome,
Aye.
Gerber.
Aye, motion carried.
Okay. Next item would be Section 5.2, Insurance, and I'm going to pass down, I've got some questions for you to think about here. Hold on 1 second, I'm sure we've got enough copies of that. I've got one.
We just need one to
One more?
release this.
And on health insurance, we're going to talk about this in a broad sense. We should not discuss any specific employees. We don't want to violate anybody's HIPAA rights with regard to health coverage and who's covered with what and so forth. But I think we need to have some goals and objectives set by the village before we set about to draft an amendment with regard to health insurance. So this is meant for discussion purposes. It's to have a discussion. It may well be that this is not possible to resolve all this tonight. In fact, I'd be amazed if we got all this resolved tonight. So think about this as a start of a discussion about where you want to go with health insurance for village employees. Think about what the January meeting, whether you want to take this up at your committee of the whole or your regular board meetings in January. But I would not be looking for a motion to adopt this tonight. So number one question for the elected officials to answer, is there an intent of the village to attempt to reduce the cost of health insurance overall? Second question you have to ask yourself in analyzing this is, does the village want to align the employee contributions in the police department with all other village employees? In other words, do you want to go towards a system whereby everybody in the village pays the same amount of their premium contribution on a percentage basis as everyone else, whether you be in the police department, which is covered under Act 32, which means it's a mandatory subject for bargaining in the police department, versus everyone else under Act 10, you are able to unilaterally determine what the percentage contribution is for your employees for health insurance. So big difference there. Third thing for you to think about is, does the village have an objective in terms of cost containment, either immediate or over a period of time, such that they would want to stage in increases for employee contributions to premiums? As it is right now, you're at 5% for everyone but the police department as a contribution. That's very low vis-a-vis what the public sector has moved towards. If you were in the state plan, it would be mandated by state law that it would be a minimum of 12% employee contribution, and you're at 5%. So you're way behind the marketplace, if you will, in terms of what public sector does as far as employee contributions for premium. And where people have been behind in the past, they have staggered it in. So they don't necessarily go from 5 to 12%, effective February 1st. That'd be a pretty big blow for people to take. You might go 5% to 8%, then 8% to 12% over a period of 12 months or over 18 months or something of that nature. That's what I meant by staggered or staged increases. Fourth thing you have to ask yourself is, does the village want to avoid being the insurer of choice in the event an employee's spouse otherwise has coverage available from another source? It is very common in the public sector and in the private sector for you not to be the last man standing and have everybody under your policy, okay? And you do have that situation right now, where anybody who has a spouse, especially with the fact that you're only getting 5% contributions to premium, in the police department, you're getting 0% contribution to premium, okay? So if you think about it, you are sort of the insurer of choice right now based on the percentages that you're paying. So one of the things you want to do here is, if somebody is covered for health insurance, be a spouse of any employee, you could do what's called a spousal carve-out and say that those people must be covered under the spouse's plan. So if the spouse is working somewhere else, it stands to logic, why wouldn't they take their health insurance elsewhere? Why should the village be paying those additional costs? And you'll find that there probably will be some of those in the village, but I haven't done an exact head count. The next one is number 5 to consider, is what would be the effective date or dates which would be appropriate, give them a reasonable period of time to go out and secure that coverage. It is a qualifying event the moment you tell them, though, that they're cut off, the spouse is cut off from health insurance. So they could go to their current provider, the spouse could go to XYZ employer and say, okay, I now need to be covered under the plan. That is a qualifying event. So they are going to be covered, okay? But it might be a 30-day startup period. They might, need 60 days to get that done. I'm just suggesting to you, you want to be very gentle about the phase-in time and be prudent about when you make that effective. Sixth question is, what are the new health insurance rates for 2015? Number 7, what is the health insurance design for 2015 and beyond? What does the insurance consultant to the village say with regard to your health insurance premiums on a go-forward basis? Plan design, deductibles, all of those things. I don't know that we've looked at those or not. Number 8, it is lawful to charge more for people who are smokers for health insurance than those that are non-smokers. So the question would be, from a policy standpoint, do we plan to charge more for employees who are smokers than non-smokers? And then at the bottom of the page, it talks about some of your options here, which I've touched upon. The spousal carve-out option. B would be pay in part for the employee, and the children would be under age 26, but the spouse would pay the full premium. And by that I would mean that you are only required under the Affordable Care Act to pay for health insurance for the employee, okay? You are required to provide coverage for dependents up to age 26, but you are not required to pay for those premiums. So you could split this a number of different ways, and that's why I thought we should lay out some of these options for you so that you can have a reasoned discussion on this, perhaps in the January meeting. Third option would be a spousal surcharge if covered elsewhere. So somebody were to say, okay, my spouse does have insurance elsewhere, but I still want to remain under the village plan. You could charge them a higher premium amount to remain under the village plan, and they could remain under the village plan. If they like their doctor, like their network so much that they couldn't live without them, they would have the ability to pay a surcharge, and that would be like 50% of the premium cost that the village would be paying. So you split that kind of, just as an idea. You can make the number whatever you wanted, but some have done 50% spousal surcharge if you want to remain in the village plan anyway, because that's possible. The fourth one that's here as an option would be to increase the employee contribution for the employee, the spouse, and the dependents. So you could say, okay, we'll let everybody stay in, but we're going to increase the amount of employee contribution from 5 to 12% right away across the board, and we're not going to mess with the spousal carve-out. So these are all, you could do some of these, you could do one of these, you could do none of these. But there's a lot here, folks, to talk about, and I sense that this is probably the first discussion we've had of this. So I'd entertain any questions anybody would have about health insurance or any of these options. If you don't understand or you want me to amplify on any of this, I would. But this is really pretty much the landscape of what you would look at. And I would state to you that the police department is a slightly different ballgame because they're under Chapter 32. So if there's any police officers here present, I'm well aware of what the law is there. Any questions about health insurance? Do we have a health insurance consultant in the village?
Yes.
Okay. Because that would be a place to start, would be to find out, okay, what is the plan for 2015? What are the rates? What the plan design? Is there any plan to change anything in 2015 or beyond? Because as time goes on and you become more and more in sync with the Affordable Care Act, there's something called the Cadillac tax, and I'm sure everybody here has probably read about all this stuff in the paper, but I think it's out in 2017. You got to make sure that your plan isn't so rich that your employees are going to be taxed extra in terms of a Cadillac tax because the health insurance plan is too rich vis-a-vis what the Affordable Care Act says you are to maintain. So in other words, if you want to be a generous employer and say, we're going to do this and we're going to have luxury of this and luxury of that, you're going to screw your employees down the road, and they are going to pay dearly for this Cadillac tax. So unless this thing gets revoked somehow or revised, the Cadillac tax is something to be very, very concerned about, and it's something that, frankly, your employees, you're doing them a disservice by not having them contribute more for their premium, for them not having higher deductibles, et cetera. And I've not dove into the deductible thing at all. That's where your insurance consultant should come in. He should be telling you what's the art of the possible, what's the art of the reasonable, and there could be a staged in one there. If you were at a $500 deductible, maybe you go to $1,000. Then maybe year 2 you go to $1,500 or $2,000. But I'm guessing you might be a little bit behind on some of that stuff too. But that's a guess without knowing.
Sue?
But the Cadillac tax will come into play here if we're not careful.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
Was it, I believe it was last year, our insurance agent had, our renewal used to be January 1. But I believe it was last year, our insurance agent switched our renewal to December 1 so that it would give us another year for the Obamacare issue.
So we'll renew December 1, 2015?
Yep. Or no, 2014, we renewed
Mhm.
December 1 of 2014.
So our next opening, if you will, would be December 1, 2015.
Correct. Yep.
Any questions on, any reaction to any of that?
Act 32,
Yes.
that's a negotiated thing. Now, you can negotiate with the police through Act 32, where you could up theirs to 12% contribution. If it's agreed by them,
You can negotiate anything if it's agreed by them, yes.
yeah. If they don't agree with it, then it has to go back to the way it was.
Well, there's binding arbitration in this state, so if
Okay.
they don't agree, you could go to binding arbitration. But if everybody else in the village is paying X, Y, Z% and they're not paying anything, I mean, I think they'd have a very, very low chance of prevailing in an interest arbitration.
Okay.
So typically, public employers move towards treating all their employees the same in terms of not only deductibles, but employee contribution to premium and everything else. What makes the police more complicated is it's a mandatory subject to bargaining, not as to plan design, but as to the employee contribution to premium. So that kind of limits your options. But some municipalities have gone with bigger deductibles in their police department because they wouldn't agree to the employee contribution rates being increased. So you probably have read about that in the paper. That's prevalent all over our state. So the goal, I think, would be to have everybody treated the same, but that would just be my experience from other municipalities. I just think that's the norm, is to at least try to do that, but recognize the police, they do have interest arbitration behind them on terms of just the one issue of the employee contribution to premium, but that's usually the first order of business that people want to address because it's the one that's most easily understood, is that. But there's a lot more to it than that. These deductibles and everything else, they're in the spousal carve-out is another one. I mean, those are things that you can, by act of the village, mandate that those things be done. So,
And Rob, speaking
Yes.
on behalf of the police department, our guys have been without a contract for 2 years, and we've discussed this with our guys. I know that, not speaking exactly what's gonna happen with the contract, because that's still in negotiations, hopefully to be resolved shortly. They are aware of the health insurance issues, and I don't think it's gonna be any issue with our contract getting settled with our guys as far as the percentage that they're gonna have to pay into. Because they know it's coming, everybody knows it's coming. So as far as that, it's just that the contract's hasn't been negotiated because, you know, with all the issues into the fall and into now, so hopefully the Labor Association of Wisconsin just contacted me asking me when we were gonna open negotiations again to try to get the contract settled. So I think that's coming up,
And
and
I think in part of the bargaining, they had agreed, the police did agree to go to 5%, the same as what all the other village employees.
yeah, I don't think the percentage isn't, I don't think the percentage is gonna be an issue at all.
Right.
So it's just
That's
that
part of
they've been,
something
it's just
we
the
can-
problem is right now, it's just they're under the old contract
Right.
and they're trying to just settle a new one. So as soon as that happens, I don't foresee any issues with it.
good to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. All righty. Does anybody have any other comments or questions for Rob on any of this?
No, but I do think we should take that up at our next meeting.
Yes. Yep, and again, these questions that he's laid out are, you know, a lot of good things that we can talk about. And yes, you are correct. It's probably something that we can't.
Put on the next agenda.
Yeah.
If we can
Yeah.
have the insurance person here as well. Would that be possible?
I can check and see if he's available.
And some of this might be, I don't surmise. I know some of this is indeed confidential information. When you start talking about spousal carve-outs and stuff, I would suggest it be placed into executive session under 19.851C and G for a future meeting. I think this is clearly a topic that can be confidential in terms of the impact on individual employees.